Enter a world where the innocent faces of dolls hide unspeakable horrors. Beneath their painted smiles and lifeless eyes lurk secrets long buried, waiting for the right moment to resurface. These aren't just toys, they are silent witnesses to dark forces beyond our understanding. In the still of the night, when shadows stretch long and the air grows cold, you might hear a soft whisper or see a slight movement. Beware, for these dolls have stories to tell, stories that will haunt your darkest nightmares. It was Samantha's 4th birthday when she received the gift that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A large stuffed crocodile, modeled after the famous creature from Peter Pan, complete with a ticking clock in its belly, was given to her by her parents. Samantha, a wide-eyed little girl with a love for all things Peter Pan, was ecstatic. She named the toy Tick and brought it with her everywhere. At night, it sat proudly at the foot of her bed, guarding her dreams. For 2 months, Tick was her favorite companion. Samantha would drag the plush toy along to the park, hold tea parties with it, and often confide her little secrets in the stuffed creature. At first, her parents were pleased. After all, it was just a toy. But on the first night of the 3rd month, Samantha noticed something strange. She woke up in the middle of the night to find Tick's eyes gleaming in the darkness, as if they were alive. The glass eyes of the toy seemed to follow her every move. "Samantha, it's just a toy," her mother said the next morning when Samantha rushed to their room, terrified. Claire smiled reassuringly, but something in Samantha's tone unsettled her. "They're not real eyes, sweetie. It's probably just your imagination." Her father, David, chuckled lightly, trying to soothe her. But it wasn't. Over the following weeks, Samantha's fear of Tick grew. Every night, the crocodile's eyes would seem to follow her, watching as she moved around her room. She could swear that sometimes the toy had shifted positions while she slept. Once, it was lying on its side, other times sitting upright on her dresser, staring at her bed. The ticking sound from its belly, which was once a comfort, now filled her with dread. Sometimes it felt like the ticking grew louder, faster, echoing her own racing heart. "I don't want it anymore," Samantha told her parents one night. "Please take it away." Reluctantly, Claire and David moved the toy to the basement, thinking that Samantha's overactive imagination was at fault. But they couldn't deny that strange things had begun happening in their house. Their cat, normally a docile creature, refused to go near the basement door, hissing and arching its back whenever it got close. They started noticing cold drafts at night, even though all the windows were shut. The air felt heavier, oppressive. One night, Claire went to the basement to do some cleaning. As she moved some old boxes aside, her heart skipped a beat. There, sitting on top of an old chest, was Tick, staring right at her. She knew she hadn't left it there. Shaken, she tried to dismiss the thought. Perhaps David had moved it and forgotten to mention it. But a sense of unease began creeping into her mind. Over the next few days, she and David started noticing more strange occurrences. Things would go missing, small items like keys or toys, only to reappear in odd places, often near where Tick had been stored. The house seemed to have an eerie, restless energy, especially at night. It was one particularly cold night when Claire awoke to a faint ticking sound. She turned to see if it was coming from the alarm clock on her bedside table, but it wasn't. The sound was coming from down the hall from Samantha's room. Her blood ran cold. She rushed to Samantha's room, David close behind her. There, sitting on Samantha's bed, was Tick. The same thought raced through both of their minds. How did it get back here? Determined to rid themselves of the cursed toy, they decided to throw it out for good. They placed it in the garbage bin outside, relieved to be done with it. But the next morning when they woke up, the toy was back sitting on the kitchen table as if it had never left. Panic set in. They tried everything, donating it to charity, burying it in the backyard, even attempting to burn it. But no matter what they did, Tick always returned. By the time Samantha turned 14, the haunting had become a part of their daily lives. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, Cold spots appeared in the hallways, and the faint sound of ticking could often be heard at night, even when the toy wasn't around. Samantha, now a teenager, decided she couldn't live like this any longer. She began to research haunted objects, spending hours at the library, digging through old records and local legends. One day, she came across a small, forgotten article from decades ago. It was about a young boy who had owned a stuffed crocodile, remarkably similar to Tick. The boy had died tragically under mysterious circumstances, and afterward, every family that had taken possession of the toy had reported strange occurrences. Accidents, deaths, and hauntings seemed to follow the crocodile wherever it went. Samantha's heart pounded as she read the article. Tick wasn't just a toy, it was a conduit for something darker, something malevolent. Desperate to end the nightmare, Samantha convinced her parents to contact a paranormal expert, Evelyn, who specialized in dealing with cursed objects. When Evelyn arrived, she immediately sensed the dark energy surrounding the house. "This toy is a vessel," she explained, her voice grave. "There is a restless spirit bound to it, a child's spirit. But it has been corrupted by years of anger and pain. It wants release, but it's dangerous." Evelyn proposed a ritual to free the spirit. They needed to create a protective circle with candles and salt around the toy, chanting an incantation to break the bond between the spirit and the object. However, as they began the ritual, something went horribly wrong. The air in the room grew thick, and an icy wind whipped through the house. The lights flickered, and the walls trembled. Tick began to float into the air, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. The family could hear a child's voice, shrieking in rage and sorrow, echoing through the room. The ticking sound grew deafening, as though the clock inside the toy was about to burst. Suddenly, Samantha realized that the spirit within the toy wasn't just any restless ghost. It was connected to her in a way she never imagined. Her mother, Claire, had kept a painful secret for years. Samantha had an older sibling, a boy who had died before she was born. Claire had never spoken of it, too overcome with grief. But now the truth was undeniable. The child whose spirit was trapped inside the toy was her brother. The realization hit Samantha like a tidal wave. The spirit's anger wasn't just random, it was directed at the family who had forgotten him. "I'm sorry," Samantha whispered, stepping toward Tick as it hovered in the air. I didn't know about you." The house grew eerily silent. The ticking stopped. Tick dropped to the floor, lifeless, as if the energy that had sustained it for so long had finally been extinguished. The family was shaken but relieved. They buried the toy in the backyard, hoping that the spirit had finally found peace. For years, the haunting seemed to be over. Life returned to normal, and Samantha went on to live her life, grateful that the nightmare was behind her. After years of struggle, Alice and her younger sister, Evie, finally moved into their new home. Their mother, Marie, wanted to give them something special to mark the occasion. So, she bought Evie a new toy, a beautiful porcelain doll named Amelia. It was a gift that would later haunt their memories forever. Alice never liked dolls. She found them unnerving, with their glassy eyes that seemed to follow her every move. But Evie adored Amelia. She would spend hours brushing its long golden hair, changing its tiny dresses, and whispering secrets into its ear. For Evie, Amelia was more than a doll, it was a friend. But strange things began to happen shortly after the doll's arrival. A week after the doll had settled into the house, the small accessories that came with Amelia, the brush, the shoes, the dresses, all disappeared. At first, Evie was devastated, crying for hours. Their mother, Marie, thought it was Alice playing a prank, but Alice swore she had nothing to do with it. Days later, Eva's heartbreak deepened when the doll itself vanished. Despite the confusion, life went on. Eva, though sad, soon found comfort in a new stuffed toy. The mysterious disappearance of Amelia was brushed off as just one of those childhood incidents. 2 years passed, and the family was moving to a new house. The house had become too small for their growing needs, and it was time for a fresh start. As they packed the last of their things, the new tenants arrived. Later that week, the tenants called with a strange question. They had found something peculiar in the attic, a porcelain doll with golden hair. Marie and Alice had all but forgotten Amelia, but the discovery sent chills down their spines. Marie instructed the new tenants to keep the doll if they wanted or dispose of it, but something about the situation didn't sit right with Alice. She had to see it again. When they returned to retrieve a forgotten box, Alice spotted the doll. Amelia was sitting on a dusty chair in the attic, looking exactly the same as she had 2 years ago, perfectly preserved, untouched by time. Her cold, lifeless eyes seemed to stare straight into Alice's soul. No one could explain how the doll had reappeared or why it had been hidden. That night, Alice began to dream about the doll. In her dreams, Amelia wasn't just a toy. She was alive. Alice would see her moving, crawling through the dark, whispering Eva's name in a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. A week after the discovery, strange things started happening in the new house. Eva complained of hearing scratching sounds in the walls at night. Marie dismissed it as the noise of settling wood, but Alice knew better. The sounds were followed by something worse. Eva's new plushie went missing. Soon after, furniture began to shift on its own. Objects that had been lost for years suddenly reappeared in strange places. Each incident was more unnerving than the last. One evening, when Alice was home alone, she heard the unmistakable sound of a doll's giggle. She rushed into Eva's room, and there it was Amelia, sitting on Eva's bed, staring up at her with those empty eyes. Desperate, Alice begged her mother to get rid of the doll, but Marie was reluctant. It was a valuable antique, she said. But the events escalated. Eva woke up screaming one night, claiming Amelia had whispered to her in the dark, telling her things no child should hear. The doll had become a symbol of something far darker than any of them had realized. Alice took matters into her own hands. One night, she grabbed Amelia and tried to burn her. But no matter how hard she tried, the flames wouldn't touch the doll. The fire seemed to avoid it, as if some unseen force was protecting the cursed toy. Alice could feel something malevolent growing around her, an energy that pulsed with the doll's very presence. After weeks of torment, Alice decided to investigate Amelia's origins. She uncovered a horrifying truth. Amelia wasn't just any doll. She was crafted by a notorious doll maker in the 1800s, who was rumored to have imbued his creations with the spirits of those who had wronged him. Each doll was said to be cursed, and many had disappeared or caused misfortune for their owners. Amelia, it seemed, was one of his most cursed creations. Armed with this knowledge, Alice sought the help of an old family friend, a priest known for his knowledge of the supernatural. Father Thomas listened intently as Alice recounted the strange events surrounding the doll. He agreed to help, but warned her that breaking such a curse would be dangerous. They set up a ritual in the basement of the house, where Amelia had been locked away. As Father Thomas began to chant, the room grew cold. Shadows danced along the walls, and the air felt thick with a presence that was no longer invisible. Suddenly, Amelia's eyes moved. Her lips parted, and a childlike voice whispered, "You can't stop me." The lights flickered, and the walls trembled. But Father Thomas didn't stop. The chanting grew louder, filling the house with a reverberating hum. In a final act of defiance, the doll launched itself across the room, hitting Father Thomas with a force no doll should possess. But Alice, fueled by fear and determination, grabbed the doll and held it in place. Father Thomas shouted the final words of the exorcism, and Amelia went still. The room was suddenly silent, the cold air dissipating. Amelia's once perfect face cracked, her glassy eyes shattered, and she crumbled into dust. The nightmare was finally over, or so they thought. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal. Eva no longer woke up screaming, and the house felt like home again. But one evening, as Alice was walking past Eva's room, she heard a faint giggle. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. She opened the door to find nothing but an empty room. On the bed, however, was a small doll shoe, one that had gone missing years ago. The curse wasn't broken. It had only just begun. Alice stood frozen at the door, her breath shallow as she stared at the tiny doll shoe. It was impossible. She had seen Amelia disintegrate into dust, and yet the shoe was there, perfectly intact, as if taunting her. Fear prickled at the back of her neck, and for the first time in weeks, the air in the house felt heavy again. She grabbed the shoe and tossed it into a drawer, hoping to forget about it. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Then the nightmares returned. This time, they weren't just confined to Alice's sleep. Eva woke up screaming night after night, claiming that Amelia was back, crawling into her bed and whispering in her ear. Marie, desperate for answers, tried everything: new locks, different rooms, even moving Eva's bed, but nothing worked. The nightmares persisted, and the doll's presence grew stronger. One night, Alice was jolted awake by a soft rustling sound coming from Eva's room. Her heart pounded as she crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under her weight. As she approached Eva's door, she could hear a faint, high-pitched giggle, like a child playing hide and seek. Her blood ran cold. She swung the door open, but the room was empty, except for Eva, fast asleep in her bed. Alice's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. And then she saw it. The small doll shoe, the same one she had hidden in the drawer days before, was now sitting on Eva's nightstand, placed carefully next to her pillow. A wave of dread washed over her. Someone or something was toying with them. Alice knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The doll, or whatever malevolent force was attached to it, wasn't finished with them. Over the next few days, the house came alive with strange occurrences. Doors slammed shut on their own, lights flickered unpredictably, and the temperature would drop suddenly, making the air thick with an unearthly chill. Eva grew more and more withdrawn, refusing to speak about the dreams or the doll. But Alice knew the connection between her sister's silence and the escalating disturbances. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible, just a soft murmur on the wind. But as the days passed, they grew louder and more persistent, filling every corner of the house. Eva would cry out in the middle of the night, saying she could hear Amelia's voice calling her name over and over again. But it wasn't just Eva. Alice began hearing the voice too, a raspy, childlike whisper that seemed to follow her no matter where she went. With the situation spiraling out of control, Alice knew she had to act. She returned to Father Thomas, but when she arrived at the church, she was greeted with devastating news. Father Thomas had fallen ill, bedridden with a mysterious fever. Unable to help, he directed Alice to someone who might, a woman named Eliza, an expert in the paranormal and ancient curses. Eliza lived in a small cabin deep in the woods, a place shrouded in mystery. Alice, desperate to save her family, wasted no time in seeking her out. When she arrived, she found a woman in her late 50s, her eyes sharp with understanding and wisdom. Eliza welcomed her inside, listening intently as Alice recounted the horrific events surrounding Amelia. "Eliza, I need to know, can the curse come back? Can it survive after the doll was destroyed?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. Eliza's face grew grim. The doll was just a vessel. Destroying it only freed the spirit within. If the spirit still lingers, it means it has found a new way to attach itself, perhaps through an object or even a person. Alice's heart sank. Could the doll's curse now be latching onto Eva? Was her sister now the vessel for the spirit that once haunted the doll? Eliza explained that to sever the connection, they would need to perform a powerful ritual, one that required both Alice and Eva to face the entity together. The ritual would be dangerous, and the spirit, now untethered from the doll, would fight back. That night they prepared. Alice, armed with protective talismans provided by Eliza, sat next to EVA in a darkened room. The candles flickered as Eliza began the incantation, her voice steady but filled with tension. The air grew heavy, and the whispers began again, louder this time, swirling around them like a storm. Suddenly, Eva's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and from her lips came a voice that was not her own, high-pitched and filled with malice. "You can't stop me," the voice hissed. "I will never leave." The room shook, and a shadowy figure materialized in the corner, a childlike silhouette with glowing, hollow eyes. It was Amelia, or rather the spirit that had once inhabited her. Alice's hands trembled as the shadowy figure grew stronger, looming over them with dark intent. Eva convulsed, her small frame racked with the spirit's control. Eliza's chants grew louder, filling the room with an ancient power that seemed to push back against the darkness. But the entity was strong, and it fought back with a vengeance. "Eva, stay with me," Alice screamed, gripping her sister's hand. For a moment, the real EVA seemed to surface, her eyes flickering with recognition. But the spirit pulled her back into its grasp, laughing cruelly. The shadow advanced, its cold presence filling the air, threatening to snuff out all light and hope. With a final, desperate effort, Alice stood her ground. "You don't belong here," she shouted, holding the talisman tightly. "Leave my sister alone." The spirit let out an ear-piercing scream as Eliza completed the final chant. The shadow wavered, flickering like a candle in the wind, and then, with one last shriek of rage, it dissolved into nothingness. The room fell silent.